I won a stand-up comedy competition when I was 23 and then slowly lost my sense of humor and eventually quit doing comedy altogether.
This is Laugh or Death, hosted by keynote speaker Paul Osincup.
Welcome back to the Laugh or Death podcast. I'm really happy to have you listening as always. And today I wanted to tell you about these two posters that are behind me here in my studio. These are posters from two stand-up comedy competitions that I won like 20 years apart, actually 23 years apart, if I'm being exact. So, winning a stand-up comedy competition 23 years apart really means that you're an old person. I cannot believe, as I'm saying this out loud, that it's 23 years apart. That makes me sad. Anyway, but it's not that I don't have them here in my studio because I won. And I didn't get them framed because I won. I have them up because of what they mean, and specifically the time in between them. I mean, I guess part of it is because I won. I don't think I would frame a poster of a competition that I lost. So yes, there is that, but man, there's a lot of meaning between these two stand-up comedy competitions. And first, I'll tell you, I hate stand-up comedy competitions. I think they are weird. I'm just a freakishly competitive person. I don't like to lose, so that's part of my problem just with any competition. And now that I'm old, I realize that I really just need to chill out on the competitiveness. But stand-up comedy is a weird thing to have be competitive because it's already a meritocracy. Like, there is no competition. The audience tells you whether or not you're funny. Your jokes either make the audience laugh or they don't. And so to me, that's the win and lose of it is you get on stage, people laugh, great, it feels good, and you've done your job. But these two, stand-up comedy moments in my life kind of represent why I do what I do. The first one it was in Denver, and it was a comedy contest. It was sometime around the year 2003. I can't quite remember, but I was in graduate school, and I've always loved humor and comedy. Ever since I was a little kid, I would watch comedy, and I had always wanted to try stand-up. People had told me that I should try stand-up. And I was in graduate school. I was nearing the end of graduate school, and I had actually, humor had been getting me through a little bit, but I was really in an unhealthy place, and I didn't have enough time to really be watching comedy, definitely not doing any comedy yet. And I had gotten really into graduate school. I had a graduate assistantship where I was in charge of the residence halls of half of campus. And so I was on call a lot, very serious job. I remember going when I was like 22 to meet with my advisor, and it was on the second floor of the education building. And when I got in there, I was like, sorry, I'm late. And she's like, did you just come up that flight of stairs? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, and you're out of breath. You're 22 years old, man. Get it together. I was a stress case, okay? I was an absolute stress case in graduate school. And I had actually developed an arrhythmia in my heart, due to the amount of stress. And it was not good for me. At one point, some friends were having a house party, and they were making it like a talent show house party. And they were like, you should do some stand-up for this house party. And so I wrote some stand-up, and I did it. And the jokes worked, and it went pretty well. And that was honestly my first ever stand-up gig, was at a house party. And that got me back into my love of comedy. And I started writing more. And then I went to a local comedy club and asked the manager, hey, give me 3 minutes. If I'm not funny, never have me back. You don't have to pay me. I think they gave me a free beer that night. But it went really well. That 3 minutes went really well. They had me back. And then I started doing stand-up and going to open mics. This helped get me through my last year of graduate school. I think it was good for my mental health to have that part of my brain working and just trying to see the lighter side of life. It was very good for me, particularly balancing with such a serious job. And then there was a a competition, some kind of a stand-up comedy competition. I had been doing open mics around, but it was like the Cap City, Denver comedy competition. It was going to go on for about 4 or 5 weeks. I think there were about 30 or 40 comics. And I entered and I won the whole thing. I could not believe it. But I won this competition. It meant that I got to do an opening set at the Comedy Works in Denver, which was like a freaking big deal. And I wish I could remember all my jokes from back then. Honestly, I was a young comic. It was a lot. I don't even think they were that good. But I remember I did have like some kind of a bit about the Crocodile Hunter. The Crocodile Hunter was really big back then. And I remember having some bit about how optimistic and positive the Crocodile Hunter always was. Like every animal he ever saw, he thought was beautiful. You know, like he could find a bug with like 4 buttholes on its forehead and be like, have a look at her. Absolutely gorgeous. You all right? Oh, I see you looking at me with those pretty brown eyes. Uh, I think it went on like, God, I can't. It went on like, what if he was a doctor? He would have all the patients like feeling good about themselves. Like, have a look at you. You're gorgeous. I don't know, whatever. But anyway, I won this competition. It was cool. And sadly though, that me winning that competition all of a sudden made me think like, I got to start taking this stand-up thing seriously. You know, I really got to get serious about stand-up comedy. And that sentence in itself can kind of tell you where the rest of the story goes, because this is also around the time I graduated, got my master's degree, and I got a full-time job at the University of California, Riverside as a full-time residence director. I was in charge of a couple of the residence halls there, and I sucked. Not at the job. I was very good at the job, but something happened because in my head, like work-wise, I became very serious, very locked in. Like I got to buckle down, and I think I was a fresh graduate who knew everything. I took my work way too seriously. I started becoming very negative and complained a lot. This was also at the same time that I was starting to take comedy way too seriously. Like I couldn't sleep because I would be trying to think of and write jokes and go over them. If I had a bad set, it absolutely ruined me, even if it was stuff that I had no control over. Like I remember there was this one time where there was a mic at this pizza place that wasn't even a comedy club, and it was like we were forcing comedy on them. I don't know who set this up, but there were like still TVs on at the bar. People are watching football, and I'm sitting there with a mic. People did not want to be there to listen to comedy, and it went horrible. My best friend was like, dude, that was brutal. And I was like, yeah, I could not get over stuff like that. I was taking it so seriously. And eventually comedy became all or nothing to me. It was like, I'm either all in on this all the time, or I just need to stop it. And so it became nothing. I quit doing comedy. I dove into work 100%. And I couldn't even watch or enjoy comedy, which was, I think, the bigger problem. Because if I watched comedy, I would analyze it. I would analyze myself. I would compare other comedians to me and be like, why couldn't I do that? Or, hey, I think I could do that, whatever. So I just quit watching comedy altogether. And I completely lost the plot of comedy and life. Like comedians are supposed to find the absurdity and levity in life. And I couldn't function because I was taking it way too seriously. And I was recently listening to an episode of Conan O'Brien's podcast, Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. You probably haven't heard of it. Maybe probably haven't even heard of him. It's a small startup podcast. They're trying to do what we're doing here on Laugh or Death. But anyway, I was listening to an episode of his podcast, and he was talking to another comedian, and they kind of went through the same thing. They were in regular jobs and very depressed when comedy wasn't a part of their lives, to the point that when people later learned that they became comedians, they were like, you? And I got to imagine that's how some of the people at my first job at the University of California feel about what I do now. Like, really? Because you sucked when you worked here. You were kind of like grumpy all the time, very pessimistic. I had always, I felt like, been a bright person to be around, fun and funny and gregarious. But not then, man. I was just way too serious about everything. And again, started getting like really stressed out. I did end up going to and doing a little bit of therapy there, which was helpful. And eventually I moved back to Colorado because the love of my life, who I met, lives there. And she and I decided to move in together. That's a whole nother story for another day. But eventually she's the one who became my wife, Kelly. When I was in Colorado, I started realizing that a lack of levity and humor in my life was a problem. I became an academic advisor for at-risk students at a community college, which is a great job. And I was very serious about that job too. But with some of the therapy I did back in California, I realized that like I was taking life too seriously. And I started researching humor and the impact humor has on just our lives in general. And I remember giving a presentation about that then when I was an academic advisor. I gave a professional presentation to other administrators. And that's when I started learning a lot of the stuff that I talk about now, that humor lowers cortisol in our brain, which is what causes us stress. It increases dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins that make us feel happier. It is very good for us. I realized that even if you are not trying to be a comedian, that humor and laughter should be a part of your life because it's good for you. And that I can't just work and not laugh and live my life as the gregarious, goofy person that I am, even if I don't want to pursue comedy. And that's where I realized I need to be who I am. And it's not like, it's not even like trying to be a professional comedian. Like if you want to have humor in your life, you don't have to be somebody who's trying to be a comic. It's just another thing that is good for your well-being along with the other things. Like I'm not a professional athlete, but I work out. I'm not a professional yoga instructor, but I do yoga from time to time. And, I try to eat leafy greens and fruits and vegetables, but I'm not a professional giraffe or whatever eats those. You know what I mean? So having laughter and humor in our lives is important. And for some of us, it's important at different levels. Like some of us need more of it than others. As I went on in that job, I went and I watched an improv comedy show in town. It's called Clown Box Improv. If anyone is listening that knows those guys that started Clown Box, they were awesome. Shout out to those guys. And I was like, oh, improv, this is so cool. It made me laugh. It made me feel good. And then one day I saw that they had a spot. They were auditioning for somebody to be part of the improv team. And I auditioned and I got the spot and I became part of the Clown Box Improv group. And we did like legit performances at theaters. People paid to come see us. It was insane. But what was like even better for me was that it was comedy that was so good for my brain. And it got me out of my head. Like stand up, I was always in my head about writing the next joke and how it went over with the audience and all this. But the whole point of improv is to get out of your executive functioning, like planning, list making part of your brain, and to stop overthinking and to just trust other people and be present and listen and say yes to the next opportunity. And usually a byproduct of doing good improv is funny things happen and it's comedy. And that was so good for me, both as a comedian and honestly just my well-being as a person. Then I got a job at Colorado State University, and this was a huge step-up job. I was the associate director of student conduct. And my job now is to meet with students who most of the time were arrested off campus for getting in trouble. I was working as part of a drug and alcohol rehab program for students with severe drug and alcohol and co-occurring mental health issues. So again, a really serious job. So what did I do? Well, I decided I gotta stop doing improv and get serious. I gotta buckle down. This is a serious job. People need to take me seriously. And how did that work out for me? Yeah, not great, man. Like, of course, I wasn't partaking in comedy as much. I wasn't watching comedy. Definitely wasn't writing or being a part of any kind of comedy. And again, started getting out of shape physically. I started becoming a total stress case, way too involved in my work. And it wasn't until like my wife and I went and did a bit of therapy for our relationship. We weren't even married yet. We were still dating. But we did some couples therapy. I did a little bit of individual as well, and realized like I need some of this to be part of my life. And I started realizing that on my own, like I cannot bottle up who I am. I could be the very serious administrator who's holding students accountable 24 hours a day. I can do that, but it's like writing with my left hand. It is not comfortable. I had to find a way to be my true self and the person that I was supposed to be at work. And that again started getting me into, I started seeing that when I was using humor, like even at work, with students, with the staff that I supervised, people really gravitated toward me. And it also worked for me. Like I connected with people more. I felt happier and I was better at my job. And that's when I really started nerding out about humor. Like, why does this work so much? It seems like I am better when I am lighter. And it seems like people react better to me when I'm lighter. I remember, I don't know if I gave this example on another episode of the podcast or not, but I remember there was a student who I had met with, and he had been in trouble, and our meeting did not go well the first time. He was very angry and upset. And now he was back again, and he was in more trouble. And this time it was him and his attorney and his mom there. And I remember reading his file, going over it, and I would always get nervous for these real serious meetings, but then I spilled an entire like 32-ounce Dr. Pepper on my lap, like right on my crotch. And I was like, oh my God. And I didn't have a spare pair of pants or time to dry it off. They're waiting for their meeting. I walk out to the lobby and I just call attention to it. And I called his name and I looked down at my pants and I go, I hope your day's starting off better than mine. And I remember that young man just looking at me and going, just with a dry sense of humor, like, I told you to see a doctor about that. And everyone within earshot just cracked up laughing at his comment, at me, whatever. Everyone, his mom was the only one not laughing. She like slapped his leg, like, what are you doing? But like, that's a moment where just carrying myself lightly, I didn't even say anything funny. I just kind of offered humor as an olive branch to this young man, and he took it. But like carrying myself lightly, not taking myself too seriously, there's magic in that. So these moments started percolating, and that's when I started really getting into the research of it. I ended up doing a TEDx talk on humor and leadership, and ended up joining an organization called the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor. I was like, there's people who study this stuff, study the science of why humor helps our mental health and our well-being in life. And eventually that led me to moving here to Montana with my wife, Kelly. And it led me to being in this situation where when we first moved here, I just did a few weeks ago, there's another episode of the podcast where we talked about our house catching on fire. We lost most of what we owned when we first moved here to Montana. That was a really difficult time because it was right during the start of COVID. We knew nobody. We didn't know anyone here. I had no friends or connections at all here. And we had just lost our home and had to move into a tiny house during COVID. Now, this is a recipe for a mental health disaster. But at least by now, I realized that humor was a big part of my overall health and well-being. And so, although this was all very difficult, and although like COVID generally was very difficult, I leaned in to my weird, goofy self. I was making funny videos, just trying to make people laugh through COVID, having as much fun as I could. I was able to do some talks about humor virtually to some companies, be creative. Like that was very important to my overall health and well-being at the time. I remember one time Kelly came home. She's a veterinarian, so she was still working full time, like outside of the house. She comes home. I had been home alone all day for many days during COVID, during this time. She comes home and I'm in like, I've got fake tattoo sleeves, like a wig on and eyeliner. And she's like, "What in the hell are you doing?" And I'm like, "I'm working." She's like, "Is that my eyeliner?" I'm like, "Well, it's not mine." I was doing some stupid Green Day thing. I don't know what I was doing. But anyway, hey, I may have looked like I lost my mind, but I was actually keeping my mind doing this stuff. As COVID started to lift, I found what finally got me connected to other people and in the community, which was the Last Best Comedy Club here in Bozeman. And before I knew it, I was a part of two different shows. I was performing improv on stage nearly weekly, definitely a few times a month in a couple of different improv shows, teaching improv classes to people, and back to this like yes and way of life, connecting with funny friends and a community of people. And that eventually led to me going, you know what? I think it's time to start writing stand up again and to start performing stand up again. I think I can do it in a way that is like fun and that I'm not going to take it too seriously, because going to the comedy club in general and doing comedy, like even when I was feeling overwhelmed and I'm like, I've got too much to do or I just don't feel like it tonight or whatever, every time I would go, I would feel so much better afterward. It's like working out. It's like going to the gym. You think, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this, or I don't know if I have the energy for it. But every time afterward, you're like, I feel great. And that's what improv was making me feel like. It was so good for my mental health and well-being, let alone connecting with other people. And I felt like I was finally at a point where I could get back to doing stand-up. And so I started writing some stand-up, trying some stuff out, doing some open mic, working out material. And I wasn't even planning on entering this Montana's Funniest Person stand-up comedy contest. But the person running the contest, like the day before the signups closed, was like, "Why aren't you entering this? Just enter it." And I was like, okay, fine. So I did. And one of the coolest parts was that, I made it. It went on for several weeks, and then I made it to the finals week. And the finals week, my sister was out visiting from Spain, so she got to be there for the finals, and I won, which was cool. One really cool thing about that was that there's this legendary comic that lives locally named Rich Hall. He used to be on Saturday Night Live. He sells out he's huge in the UK for some reason, but he's like a cowboy that lives here in Livingston. He was one of the judges at the finals. And there's like a judge's decision, and there's a crowd decision, and that kind of stuff. And I saw him a couple weeks afterward at a show, and he introduced me to somebody. He said, this is Paul. He's Montana's Funniest Person. And I said, "Yeah, Rich, thanks for voting for me." And he looks at me and goes, "What? I didn't vote for you." And he goes, "I knew you were getting a crowd vote. Everybody was voting for you. I voted for the girl." And it was so funny because one of the proudest things about winning that competition was I was like, Rich Hall voted for me. Like he's such a legend and he voted for me. And then a couple weeks later, he tells me, "I didn't vote for you," which I found hilarious. My 23-year-old self would have been gutted by that. But it was just hilarious to me that he's like, don't get so big headed, dude. I didn't even vote for you. All right. So I don't know, man. It was fun to win, but I also now am old enough to have the perspective of like, it means a lot and nothing at the same time, and if I could, these two competitions, 20 years, 23 years apart, everything that's happened in between that of me just kind of losing my sense of humor over the course of time and then trying to gain it back and seeing how much comedy and humor really is important to me. If I could go back and give my 23-year-old self advice, three things I think I would tell my 23-year-old self. One, it's not a competition. When you're on stage, people are rooting for you. like particularly in real life, not so much on social media, but in real life, like people want to see a show and they want to see their performer do well. They're uncomfortable when you're uncomfortable. Like the crowd is rooting for you. You go to any kind of a show or a talk or anything, you want that person to knock your socks off. So you're not competing, definitely not competing against the crowd. Like you're creating a moment with them. And even other comedians, and this is true for people in business as well, but like even other comedians, that's not my competition. That's my community. And when I was younger, I looked at other comics as like, that's my competition. I wish I had made relationships with them. Those are the only people who would understand what I was going through and that I could bounce material off of. And I see this all the time now in the corporate world. Like I speak at a lot of corporate events. You get all of these companies that technically are competitors of one another. All these people from these different competing companies come together for a conference. Maybe they're all the marketing directors of their companies. They are also their own community because those are the only other people who really understand what it is that they're going through. And so seeing our competition as actually our community, it would be a huge mind shift I would have given myself, my younger self. The other thing, and this is something I still try to remind myself of and that I would remind you, is stop comparing your insides to other people's outsides. Like it is just not fair to yourself to be comparing how you're feeling to just the outside of what you're seeing from other people. And I would do that all the time. And like, wow, everybody else seems like they have it all together and that they're doing so well. But I'm only seeing that outside version of them while I'm feeling the inside version of myself. So I would give my 23-year-old self the advice of like, quit comparing your insides to other people's outsides. And finally, a mantra that I've learned to live by going through some difficult times in life, the death of my mom, our house burning, all that kind of stuff, is don't live your life like an actor in a drama just to reach the end to find out you were the director and it could have been a comedy. Leave it to me to make a drama out of doing stand-up comedy and making it so dramatic. Like I took it just way too seriously and I didn't have to do that. Because what I've learned is that humor is therapeutic. And some people are okay with just microdosing it. Like they don't need that much of it in their lives. But, humor and laughter, it's important and they need to get some of it. And it's good for their well-being in small doses. Others, need to take it as needed for bouts of chronic seriousness. I know chronic seriousness is like what I've been dealing with my whole life. And for me, I've realized that I need a much higher dosage. I need like a constant IV drip of humor and comedy. I need to be immersed in it, creating it. I need like one of those like insulin pumps of humor and comedy that just like beeps when I don't have enough laughter in my life. I've realized that has to be a part of who I am. I am much more mentally capable. I'm more fun to be around. I'm a better version of myself when comedy and humor is a part of my life. And when I get to create it and make other people laugh. The last thing I would tell my younger self is a George Bernard Shaw quote, which is, you don't stop laughing because you get old. You get old because you stop laughing. Thanks as always for listening. Please follow the podcast wherever it is that you're listening. And also subscribe to my YouTube page as well. It really helps us spread the word. And until next time, see you later.
You've been listening to Laugh or Death with Paul Osincup. If you're planning a conference or event and want something smart, meaningful, and actually funny, book Paul to speak. To learn more or to get a copy of his book, The Humor Habit, visit laughordeath.com.